Yeah, what I will talk about today is about the impact of software. So today there will be, I appreciated the first presentation, I'm sure I'll appreciate the next presentations. Mine is a bit different. I want to talk about volume, about money. Where's the money coming from in software and how does that influence the software business? Yeah, so I work for a medical software company in Switzerland with a main development group in Montreal, and I learned some things already in the first presentation, and one of the interesting things, it happens for the second time in my career that we think very carefully where we put our engineers, but for the second time in my career, my customers go to China. So it's still a mess in my agenda. Yeah. Okay, what I will talk about, most of the empirical data is coming out of a series of columns that we produce every 2 months in IEEE software. It's about the impact of software on a industry. And I will show you some numbers out of that. And I run that column with Les Hatton, who was a part-time professor here one time in geophysics, but he's now full-time in software, and he's in London now at the Kingston University. Okay, I think we all agree that software is very important. First, we put the computer industry upside down. Right now, we're doing it in mobile phones. We're busy in medtech. We do it for public sector software. Software is important. And I think with many people here from the software industry and the software profession, we don't have to waste time on that. I would like to spend some more time on questions where we don't have the answers yet. And a couple of these answers, you know, Mark Andreessen, the guy who did the first browser, he writes columns in the Wall Street Journal, and he wrote one in September that's worth reading. It's called "Why is Software Eating the World?" Why is software taking over so many industries? He has some answers, but not all, because he's in the board of HP, and they're struggling a bit at the moment with that shift from hardware to software. An interesting question is also, will the impact of software, will it be the same in different industries? Software put the computer industry upside down. Some of you that are old enough, you know, if 20, 30 years ago, if you bought a computer from IBM, you got a text processor from IBM, an ERP system from IBM, and everything from IBM. And of course, then the customers in the industry decided to change that, and now the software you buy is independent of the hardware you have. Except for Apple, that has a 5% market share in computers. So let me be the first one to name Apple, because typically somebody mentions it during the presentation. So I will now not mention it unless you have questions at the end, and then I'm happy to answer them. So the first question is, okay, is the impact the same in different industries? The second is a quantitative understanding. When does software start changing the business? It was already mentioned, I spent some time working in Philips, and I worked a lot with people like Hans Aerts, and we always had the joke, the minute that anybody in Philips produces a software program of more than 1 million lines of code, they're in trouble. And it was not because we could not engineer more than 1 million lines of code in a good way and get it to the market, but typically if you go across that 1 million line, we called it a sound barrier. If you go across that 1 million line, typically something changes in the business. You have to start making money with your software, or somebody else is starting to make money with it, invest more in it, and ends up with better software. So that's the quantitative understanding. I'll try to answer some based on the empirical data I have from different industries. And of course, the big question is timing. When will it happen? It's not that difficult to predict that a lot of paper books will go to electronic books. The big question is, when will it happen, and how do I make money afterwards if I'm a publisher? It's the same with electronic patient records. Of course, in the end, we'll have electronic patient records, but the big question is, when will it happen? Okay, well, what we decided to do about 3 years ago in IEEE software, we decided, okay, let's ask senior managers in various industries. And so let's just ask the people who work in the industry, who see all the changes happening around them. And what we could offer them is, hey, we have 3 pages for you, write a column for us. And we only had 2 minimum demands. First thing is, we wanted to know how big is the thing, how big is the software you're writing, and give it to us in lines of code, because that's the easiest to count. And the second thing is, how many copies do you sell in a year? Those were the 2 things that we thought that may give us some capability to compare. And I'm not here to discuss, you know, the difference between 1 million and 1.2 million lines of code. That's the same. It's interesting to see, okay, are you doing 100,000, 1 million, or 10 million? That's kind of the order of magnitude I'm interested in. And I don't get too nervous on 10% mistakes anyway, but that's more maybe my personality. Okay, so far we've published 10 columns from the car industry. I'll show some examples later. So Bosch, TomTom wrote one, magnetic resonance. By the way, the MR is an interesting one. If you're some of the easy things that I also used to say in the past, software doubles every 2 years. It's not true. It may happen, like there was somebody from the gaming industry there, it goes pretty fast, but the MR machine is interesting. Well, and people are pretty happy to provide data, by the way. If you ask them, and you ask the right people, you get the data. The MR software scanner, I spent some time there, in 1990 it was 1 million lines of code. 2001 it was 3 million lines of code. 2010 it was 9 million lines of code. So it goes times 3 every 10 years. The team, by the way, does something similar. So we had some discussions with the author of that column, and you can really ask yourself, hey, you now already have a couple of hundred software engineers. What are you going to do in 10 years? You're going to put a couple of thousand people there? Can you afford that? Because an MR machine, by the way, if you know it, there are 3 big suppliers, Siemens, Philips, and GE, and Philips sells about 1,000 of those a year. So they spend a lot of money on the software for only getting 1,000 new customers a year. That's the kind of stuff I want to talk about. You see the row. There's one interesting one, the train control system of the city of Tokyo. That's low volume. There's only one Tokyo. And it's going to be pretty busy to sell. It's pretty difficult to sell that system elsewhere. But by the way, there's one famous example where people tried it. You know, we're in the Netherlands. You know that the OV card system that I used this morning myself. Is there anybody here who was involved in that? Oh, great. Good. No, but one of the interesting things I've heard is that they try to copy parts of the similar system there is in the city of Hong Kong. Hey, that's true. So that's confirmed here. And what's interesting, and that's a good idea. They already have a pretty good system there that's already running for a long time. They try to copy it here. It's not easy. And one of the things is if you lose your ticket in Hong Kong, you have to pay the maximum price ticket in Hong Kong, which is like, I don't know, for $4 Hong Kong dollar, let's say €3. If you apply that rule in the Netherlands, somebody who comes from from The Hague to Delft, which is, I paid €4 this morning, I lose my ticket and they tell me, hey, you're going to pay now Maastricht to Groningen first class return. So, yeah. And that's the interesting thing about the train control. By the way, it was 20 million lines of code. The system that controls the trains in Tokyo is 20 million lines of code. Installed base of 1. I told you, we demand to know, okay, how big is your system, how many copies do you sell in a year? And the size of the bubble is pretty big, because some people don't want to say it exactly. We know the exact numbers, but we kind of hide it a little bit. It's somewhere in the middle of the bubble. So Tokyo is 20 million lines of code, installed base of 1. The TomTom, I'll show you more detailed numbers later. Top right is interesting, the Real Player. You have Real Player was in all the Nokia phones on many PCs. They sell 100 million copies a year. That's high volume. And their total source base is about 100 million lines of code. And of course, if you have a cheap phone, they will not stick 100 million lines of compiled code in there. But this is mass volume and a pretty big and nasty system. And part of it is even open source. They have a kind of open source approach between companies. So it's pretty interesting. The current column is copier. It's from Fuji Xerox, a typical copier, that you have in the hallway. So it's faxing, printing, copying, 10 million lines of code. And most of it is coming, I see some people shaking no, read the column. And what's very interesting, that most of it is coming from contradictory requirements. For example, if you're printing, you're typically not next to the printer. And you print from your own place. Which means the most important performance indicator is number of pages per minute. If you're copying, you are next to the machine. Most important performance indicator is suddenly time to first copy. And that all has to be, and if you get a fax in, the worst thing that can happen, because it typically involves like orders, commercial stuff, you don't want to lose pages. Well, if you copy, you don't care if you lose a page because you have the original. So it's really interesting to see how that industry is really struggling with that. And by the way, what's also interesting, they don't share a lot yet. It's still typically the owners of the copier that write all the software themselves. Will it stay like that? I don't know. Airplanes. You know that a flight management system is the interface between the pilot and the plane. Huh? So if your video is not working on a long flight, that's not nice. If the flight management system is not working on any flight, you have a serious issue. So I think you can say that a flight management system is crucial for a plane. You know that the flight management system on board of Airbus and Boeing is the same software written by Honeywell? About 1 million lines of code? Huh. And it's also on Dassault, Cessna, even on Sikorsky. And on Sikorsky, these big helicopters, they have the same flight management system. I think software people should ask themselves the question about money, and I like this example. If you want to buy an Airbus 380, it's 300 million. If you're cheap, you buy a Boeing 787, it's 150 million. And still, these people don't write all the software themselves. I've spent a lot of time in different, I've spent 25 years, a lot of time. I spent a lot of time in the software industry, and very often you meet companies, industries, where people write their own software. And the question is, why? Typically, the only good answer is, yeah, we always did it like that. But what you see typically is, as a supplier, you cannot keep doing it. Because typically, if there's somebody out there who has a bigger volume than you have, he typically ends up investing more in the software and ends up with better software. The second thing you see is customers don't want it. Like, for example, the customer of a flight management system is the pilot, but the person who pays the bill is the airline. And a couple of friends of mine fly these big things as pilots. If you're a pilot on an Airbus and you have to switch to Boeing, that takes 6 months retraining. What the airlines are not interested in is things that make it even more complicated. And especially a thing like a flight management system is typically important when things go not exactly as planned. And then you don't want a pilot to react the wrong way intuitively because he was used to the Airbus system, he's now in a Boeing. And you see that in a lot of industries. I tell you, I'm now working in a medical industry. And I work in the dental industry. If you look at the number of screens, next time you go to your dentist, check the number of icons he has on the screen. There's a lot of software coming in there, and all the old companies that make a lot of money in the proprietary business, they try to stuff their software on the desktop of the dentist. It's the same with the surgeon. Go into a surgery room, and you may find 10 to 12 to 15 screens with all incompatible data. 3 may give the blood pressure, and it's not the same number. So the message I try to bring is, if you're building software, ask yourself the question, hey, and that's not only as an engineer, but also as a manager. Who has the profit and loss responsibility here? Okay. Yeah. No, but the real good question is, hey, we're writing that software now, that's fine. Software grows, it doesn't double every 3 years, but it grows. It's an interesting one to check. Just check how big is your software now, how big was it 5 years ago, what do you think it will be in 5 years? And we will be able to keep doing it ourselves. And do our customers expect us to do that ourselves? Okay, this is an industry selling expensive stuff, and they have a smart way to get their flight management system. Closer from home. This is a column that was published this summer by Hans Gaminet and Hans Aerts. Hans is not here? Okay. It's interesting. On the left side, sales volume. How many boxes, and you all have a TomTom at home, or in your car maybe. It's more useful in your car. So on the left side is the sales volume. How many boxes do they sell in a year? And you say, so in 2004 they had like 100,000, it went to 2 million, and now in 2008 they were up to 12 million, and in the crisis it got a bit less. And the red line is the lines of code. How big is that thing? The interesting thing is you see that the volume grows much faster than the lines of code. Another interesting thing is they sell 12 million boxes a year. The biggest car manufacturer in the world is called Toyota. They sell 10 million cars a year. That means even if Toyota would be able to put the same car navigation system in all their cars, they would still not have the volume of TomTom. Now guess what? Who's going to win the car navigation war? That's going to be Garmin or TomTom, or maybe Google because they give it away. But volume wins here. And that's also, by the way, what's now happening in this industry. What you see now is that the car manufacturers, they now start sticking in the car navigation in the factory, but they don't build it themselves anymore. They get it from a company like TomTom, Garmin, or one of the others, and they don't do that themselves anymore. By the way, there's 100 million lines of software in a car, so the car guys still have some software to do themselves. And then I told you there was another column from Bosch. Bosch is a supplier, a big electronic supplier to the car industry. And they also, a lot of what they call the under-the-hood automation is done by companies like Bosch. And again, they have a bigger volume than Mercedes, BMW, and Audi. Why? Because they supply to them all. So there's 100 million lines of software in a car, and not that much is written by the car manufacturer themselves. And I can tell you one example, and also the difference here. Well, we have a Volvo. I live in Switzerland. The first years, the main mountain was getting out of the parking garage. But we have a Volvo, and it's a nice car, but the navigation system stinks. And why? I think in the end it is because if you work at Volvo, you know that the navigation system is not why people buy that car. I don't know why I bought it. My wife selected it, but that's another. So the people at TomTom know if their navigation system is not the best, it's end of job, end of company. And Volvo is selected for site impact protection system and those kind of things. So if there's somebody out there for whose software is more important for them than for you, they put it on their invoice, they have the highest volume, they're very likely going to win. Okay, some definitions. We're at the university. So I said size. Size is pretty easy. I don't want to get into a discussion on function point. Just measure your size in a way that you can consistently do over the years. We propose lines of code because that also compares a bit across industries. And volume is also interesting. What we do there is, All the President's Men, the movie with Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman about the Watergate, is follow the money. So in software you protect the value of software by licenses. So in software, follow the money means follow the license. And then you can typically easily count your installed base. For embedded software, you just count the number of boxes in which you're able to put it. Licensed software, you just ask the manager with the P&L because that's where the money comes from. He knows. Or ask a legal guy, they also know because there's always a signed agreement. Open source, you go for the number of click-throughs, and website. It's an interesting one. With a website, you never sign anything with Google or Microsoft. But typically, these people know how many unique IP addresses have used their search engine. Well, one of the next columns, by the way, is from Microsoft about their search engine. That's going to be an interesting one. So yes, we're able to, I think we can agree, we're able to quantify size, we're able to quantify volume, and we propose a new ratio that's software mileage. So, and we did that this is pretty new, it's one of the last columns we wrote ourselves. It's the number of new customers per year per line of code. The TomTom example is interesting. 6 million lines of code every year, they sell every line of code to 2 customers. It's pretty good mileage. It's better mileage than Toyota, Mercedes, or anybody else will ever achieve in that industry. Yeah, and we wrote some words around it. So if you're able to get a high mileage out of your software, you're probably going to be able to make money with that software. If you invest enough of that, you're probably going to be able to lead an industry. And what I'm going to do now is compare it across industries, and that's not very useful, but I'll show the slide anyway. And then I'll tell you what you can seriously do with it. So these are the columns we did so far. So the electronic control unit in the car, that's a Bosch product. It's 100,000 lines of code, and they're able to sell 7 million of those small EPUs per year. So that's damn good mileage. And much better than BMW or Mercedes or Audi can ever achieve. So they're happy to buy that piece of hardware with the software in it from Bosch. Okay, the second one is real, and then you go down. And of course, the worst is a train traffic system from the city of Tokyo. That's a lousy mileage. So you better have somebody who's guaranteed to pay you for the next couple of years, otherwise you'll never be able to keep that up. And that's hundreds and hundreds of people working for one customer. Sorry?
Unless you count the travelers.
That's a good point. But if the comment is unless you count the travelers. But what we said is follow the license, and a traveler doesn't sign a contract yet. What you should probably do is count the number of airline companies in the city of Tokyo, which is about 6 or 7, because they do sign an agreement with Hitachi. Yeah. And then, by the way, the same with the, like a car owner does not sign a license agreement with a software supplier yet. That may change, and then also this may change. Okay, we don't know everything, and we're at a university, so it's always nice to try to leave some research questions behind at the university, and hopefully I come back and meet Rini again, and he has the answers for me. And by the way, we have some ideas here already. One of the things is we're pretty convinced that comparable products have comparable size. I bet you that the MR system of Philips is 9 million lines of code. I bet you that the GE and Siemens system is pretty close. And then we're doing some research. We get the first columns in where people compare products within the same industry. And if it gets any sizable, if it gets over 500,000 lines of code, you need 50, 100 engineers. Things seem to middle out pretty well. If that is the case, then the only way to differentiate an industry is volume. Okay, the second one is pretty clear. If you have a small piece of software like Bosch, then your mileage is of course higher than if you're at the end where you have to integrate everything. But it makes more sense to compare within an industry than across a value chain. It's for Mercedes more important to compare to BMW than to Bosch. Okay, and the last thing, we think software mileage could be a pretty good performance indicator for a software-intensive business. Okay, I'm going to speed up because I'm going to get the 5-minute sign now. Yes. How do you use this? We prepared. You can use it to compare within an industry. The second, look to your right for trouble. In that picture with the bubble charts, if you have somebody who has a product of comparable size and is able to achieve a bigger volume, you're in trouble because they likely invest more, end up with better software. Okay. What's good, you can address this with executive management. I did it in 2 industries already, and this is what senior managers, people with a profit and loss responsibility understand. That this is like revenue per customer, this is simple ratios, that works. It's relating money, business to size of the product. And it's also pretty easy to collect. You just say, okay, count me your number of lines of code. There are many counters out there. The salespeople should know the volume. The executives are really used to do 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, and what does it mean? This is my industry at the moment. And I prefer to talk and publish about things I have done. I'm in the middle of this, so I removed all the names, all the numbers. But I'm there with the ISV independent software vendor in Switzerland. And in my industry, there are a couple of big companies. The dental supply industry is worldwide about 17 billion, and there are a couple of multi-billion-dollar companies in there. And everybody makes money. And so the reason to go to an ISV is not that, okay, we run out of money, we have to do something, but it's really like, hey, our customers don't accept it anymore. And then we triggered also the change. In terms of size, by the way, it's more like this. Revenue, we are very small. I ended up being a few pixels, so I made a star out of it. We're very small, and a couple of these guys are huge. They're like multi-billion-dollar public companies. And we were able to go into the boards of those companies and say, hey, we think we need to change something. I was in one of those big companies, and with 2 of the big companies, we agreed we should create the independent software vendors. And executive CEOs understand this. And by the way, it's big versus small, but the big advantage we have is if we wake up in the morning, the only thing that's important for us is software. And I'm running into one of the executives of one of those big ones out there last week, and he also gets it. He makes a lot of money on other stuff, but it's not software. We're the only ones who really live 24 hours a day for software. And that allows us to be better. And by the way, our software team is multiple times the size of the other guys, because software is important for us, we make money with it, so therefore we can grow the team. We also have salespeople who understand software. Let me admit, I degenerated. I started engineer, I'm more doing marketing and sales. And we focus on software, therefore we can handle those big guys out there. 2 more slides. This is the friendly summary, and then I have another summary. The suggestion is you're going to hear very interesting and important stuff today, and that's all relevant what you hear. But what my suggestion is also include software volume in your thinking. I've seen a couple of teams that did good software, and they were always surprised that the software never reached the market. And it had nothing to do with their technology. If you don't have the channels to get to the market, if you're not the volume leader in the industry, I don't care whether you hum or scrum or whatever you do, you're not going to make it. So the question is, does this apply to you? It looks like it. I'm now with a small company. And one of the benefits, I'm able to spend a few days a month in other industries. And I sometimes talk to car companies, a couple of those. The word government is not properly chosen, it's probably more public sector. Huh? I don't talk to Dutch waterschappen or anything, but... Okay, go down. It's very effective to double your volume. Eh? Like I can tell you, we had a discussion about globalization. The company I'm now with, the founder and majority shareholder, we had a very short discussion like, hey, should we start a software team in India or China or wherever in the world? Our software team is in Montreal, so yes, I have my time shift problems as well, and I fly there again next week. But we had a very short discussion, should we start a team in China and in India? And it was 5-minute discussion, it was over. And why? Because we had just been able to sign up 2 of those big guys. We just doubled our volume. And we said, hey, come on, this is much more effective than reducing 30% of the cost by going to China. Yeah. So some discussions, if you use volume in your thinking, get very short and practical. Yeah. By the way, then since August, our biggest market in the world is China, so we also end up traveling that way. So what you said is very relevant for me still. And one of the things, for engineers, the third one, getting an order in, increasing your revenue for software, that's a lot more fun than cutting cost. And cutting cost is not going to make you the market leader. So it's better sometimes to get out and start selling your software to other people than to try to meet some kind of cost restructuring that is completely contradictory to the growth of your software. Okay, the last slide, that's a short one. That's my summary.
Thanks, Michiel.